seriously knew that I was going in the military. My mother didn't like the idea. But anyhow, I did the research. I decided on aviation cadets is where I wanted to go. I didn't like the idea of being on the open water for months at a time. But anyway, in order to get there, I did not have 2 years of college, which was qualification for direct entry into the cadet programs. So I enlisted. There was an avenue whereby you took a whole battery of tests. Fortunately, I was able to pass all of the written and physical parts of the program. They put us in 3 groups: pilot training, observer training, which is navigator, etc., and where you were qualified for either. Well, obviously, I wanted pilot training. I said, well, we probably won't have a class for you for 2 years. And I was wondering, well, what do you do for 2 years? He says, well, we have what we call a pre-cadet program. And you go to this installation in Denver, Colorado, and you peel paint or whatever it is and find for you to do. I said, no way. I said, what's this observer training? So they told me, and that you can go immediately. So I never finished basic training. I got my stripe in 9 weeks and went to Lackland Air Force Base for pre-flight training, which was basically OCS in 3 months. From there I went to Harlingen Air Force Base, which is primarily navigation. It was the best decision I made at that time. As it turned out, I was still disappointed not going to pilot training. But the training I got, academic-wise and so forth, technical training, it was, well, it turned out to be my foundation for my career. I owe my training and my experience to so many people that could, we'd be here forever, try to name them all. But I flew with a lot of good people. The best thing about Bitburg, the weather was terrible, but you learned your flying skills, all of them, very well. The 525th Fighter Squadron at Bitburg was designated for the first shipment of F-102 Delta Daggers. So I wasn't there very long in F-86 and I got the first supersonic Delta fighter. I became an instructor pilot, of course, a flight examiner, and test pilot. So as the airplanes came out of test, I had to take them up a certain profile and go out to Mach 2. Going to Mach 2 in an F-106, I'm not going to say it's a thrill. Again, you're kind of, once you get to a certain point around 1.7 Mach, you're going along for the ride. And the big thing you're sweating out is what we call the variramps, to control the amount of air coming in. Obviously, at higher altitude, air pressure is low. In order to get the same amount of oxygen, you have to compress it. And that's what a jet engine does. It sucks in air and it compresses it, and lights it. But anyway, those ferry ramps, if they didn't schedule like they were supposed to, you start feeling it. It would start shuddering. So most of the time I could get to Mach 2, but there were a number of times when I got about 0.85 or 9, I'd get them going like this. And you can't just jerk the throttle back, you've got to ease it back. So you just start easing it back, hold your breath. Because if that keeps shuddering, like guys like myself, all I had to do was air to air. I never dropped any bombs or anything. They said, could these guys really do that? Well, they got their backs against the wall and they came along and they scarfed up a few of us. And I got to be one of them. The choice I had was F-4s or F-105s. And I knew a little bit about both. I don't like F4 because it has 2 seats. I don't like the F-105 because we call it a super sled. It was not maneuverable like an F4. So I chose the F4. So in, I think it was September of '66, I went to MacDill Air Force Base for the F4 training. It was wonderful. After we were there a short time, I was working with these people, and I'd asked them a couple of questions, and I would say, how about that? And I realized they weren't fully trained. So I started training backseat pilots in the radar system and how to really go about making intercepts and so forth. We get to Tonsonhoot, and there's nothing on the board taking passengers to Cameron Bay. I said, well, what do you think you're going to have? Well, I have no idea. I said, okay. So I went out to the flight line. I've done this many times. I signed on as a crew member on an airplane with munitions and everything else going to on-key. On-key is where the 1st Cavalry was stationed. Going into on-key, one of the first things I saw was a C-130 off the end of the runway burning. So I got a taste of war pretty fast. And one of the interesting things was the commander, aircraft commander of that 130 was one of my classmates. So anyhow, we did our job at on-key and hopped off to Cameron Bay. We got settled there a little bit, and the next day, I was in the air. Within a week or so, I was qualified as a flight leader, and the whole show started. There were a lot of missions, 224 missions altogether. 54 in North Vietnam, 76 in Laos, and 96 in South Vietnam. It was an everyday thing, round the clock flying. We had 4 squadrons. We flew 80 plus sorties in 24 hours. 80 sorties going. We had aircraft on alert, and that's where you get a lot of interesting flights. Coming off the alert pad, you're going into a firefight. It wasn't long, and I was pulling alert, and the first couple of days I was flying at least twice a day. About a month or so into all of this, I got word that I was going to work at the Tactical Unit Operations Center, fancy name for command post. I said, well, that's interesting. The one thing that does to you, it cuts down your flying a little bit. So after I got there and got the job, the fellow that was assistant director was ready to rotate. I said, I'll take that job. And of course, that was one of the best things I could do. The thing I didn't want, maybe some people feel different, I didn't want any time off. I had a flight of 4 F4s. Each of us had 6 750-pound bombs plus our 20mm cannon. We were assigned a target in North Vietnam. As we approached the Da Nang area, we got sent over to a forward air controller. So it wasn't unusual to be diverted. I mean, if you got a firefight going on, that's where you go. We had a cloud deck below us. We couldn't see. And it was about 5,000 feet or something like, ceiling, which we could work down there. It's not easy, but we could work down there. Anyway, the forward air controller is really excited. Coming down the roads in the daytime, this massive army of North Vietnamese in trucks and tanks going in the way. We recycled off the tankers twice. Never got clearance to strike those targets. The reason was the province chief was afraid we might harm the citadel. Okay? So we continued on and ended up doing something else. The North Vietnamese army took over Hue, immediately took out 3,000 people and annihilated them. thing I'd live with today. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Sir.
Those Marines had to go in there and brick by brick get those North Vietnamese out of there. And our casualty rate was high. Unnecessarily done. My 4 shifts of airplanes could have pretty well annihilated that whole convoy. And we never got the clearance to do it. I had a flight of F-4s, and we were sent over to a FAC to go in and support Dong Ha. When I got there, the forward air control, the firing was so heavy, he couldn't get in to mark the target. They did this a lot. When they had the siege, Quezon was a great example of how they pre-positioned artillery, both field artillery and anti-aircraft fire. They pre-positioned that all because they knew we were coming. So anyway, there was so much fire going on, he couldn't even get close. I said, well, tell me basically where it is, and I'll mark the target. And he did, and I got it pretty close. So the guys rolling in behind me had something to aim at from that point. See, that's normally what they did. When they marked the target, however it was marked, whether it's smoke on the ground or whether it's a rocket or whatever, you know, hit 10 o'clock at 50 meters or 100 meters or whatever it is. And so you train your eyeballs, you know, for that position. In this case, we were pretty fortunate. We didn't take any hits, but we wiped down all the artillery pieces, both air and ground. You know, one day you might get a DFC. It just happened that that was a special place, and it took a little notice. At 14 air medals, you could pick a number, but you know, weren't there for medals. I got involved with advanced development planning. And I also got involved with, after a while, with current systems modifications with the Air Force Logistics Command, which was on the other side, was on the Patterson side. I was on the right side. That's where aviation was really born. I don't know how I can sum this up saying, we went through a series of studies and so forth and so on. We were trying to find what we call the improved improved manned interceptor. That's what the air defense people we were doing. Got to the point where we needed to compare all of these candidates. It was obvious. So I was building up all the research data, and I collected all that research data and all these different airplanes, including the F-14 Tomcat. We spent a lot of time on missile development, fire control systems, development, radar systems, and so forth and so on. Made a lot of progress. And all of a sudden, we're looking at an airplane called the F-15. Well, F-15 was part of that study. And my deduction was the F-15 is the airplane to go with. The other thing that was taking place kind of behind the scene was we weren't going to have 2 fighter commands anymore. Long story short, it was the F-15. And I feel like it's kind of amazing, really. In the 20 years or so I flew, 12 years of fighters, I flew 6 of them. You saw that certificate in there, the maiden flight of the F-15. I consider that one the greatest honors I ever had. The F-15 can take off, go supersonic in the climb, in the vertical climb. Air superiority airplane, primarily designed and guided by fighter pilots. Never before did we have so much say in how an airplane was going to be developed and how the systems were going to be set. The big problem we had with airplanes a lot was the engineer's decision to put this there and that over there never taken into consideration what a pilot has to do to operate it. That airplane is still flying today. I've been retired over 40 years. The thing that was really great about the military, it still is today, is the camaraderie. You're caring for one another. And it goes to the whole, it's just natural, you know, it just comes natural. You don't have to have a bunch of fancy this, that, or the other thing, as long as you got people. And to me, this has finally dawned on me, it's about life in general. You know, this has been a long journey. I'm 84 years old. The thing about life, it's all about giving, not receiving.